Hello and welcome to another video tutorial. This video will discuss the week 4 assignments, both the first one and the second one. And as you can see here, I have the week 4 assignment 1 guide. It starts off by asking us to create our first Lambda function from scratch. We will give the Lambda function a name, and we're going to call it echo function, and then choose our runtime and set the proper permissions. Now, just a quick side note, some of the screenshots in the assignment guides are outdated, so this video tutorial might have different screens than what is included in the assignment guide. AWS continuously updates the interface, which is a good thing, as it helps to streamline processes and also improve on efficiency as well. So again, the guide screenshots might not be on par with the latest AWS interface. Alright, so I'm already logged into my AWS Management Console, and in the search field, I'll enter Lambda. Then from the search result, I'll right-click on Lambda and open a new tab. So this takes me to the Lambda Functions page, and here it shows you all your functions, including the function names, the descriptions, which are optional, how the code files are packaged, the runtime used, as well as when the Lambda function was last modified. And then up in the top right is the orange Create Function button. So I'll click on that to create our first Lambda function. From this page, I see that I can create a function from scratch, which is what we want to do for this assignment. Then I'll come to the name field and type echo function without any spaces. Then for the runtime, this will depend on the code that you will write. As you can see, there are multiple runtimes to choose from. Our application code was written in Node.js, so I'll choose the latest. However, I will actually ask you to change it to Node.js 14 because the code we are working with, which is the Learning Angular from Scratch application, was written in a very old code. And if we use the latest Node.js runtime, it will not run our application properly. So again, please use the Node.js runtime version 14 instead of 18. The next thing we need to do is set permissions for our Lambda function by setting it up with an existing role called lab role. So I'll expand change default execution role, then choose use an existing role. Then from the pull down arrow, I'll choose lab role, which was pre-created for us by AWS. And that's all we need to do to create our first Lambda function. So I'll click on Create Function. And now you can see from the message up here that we have successfully created our Lambda function. And we can now change the code and configuration, as well as test it to confirm that it behaves the way we expect it to behave. Now let me go back to our study guide, and the instructions say to create a test event. And we need to call it simple test with JSON data and leave everything as is and just save the new test event. So let me go back to my AWS Management Console. I'll click on the Test tab. Here I'm creating a new test event. I'll give it the test event name, which I copied from the guide. And here's my default JSON data. And per the instructions, I'll just leave everything as is. And so I'll just click on Save. Then let me go back to our guide to see what the next instructions are. And it wants me to now go back to the Code tab and click on the Index.js Code tab, and then click on the Test button to test my code. So let's do that. I'll click on the Code tab, then the Index.js Code, then I'll click on the Test button. The return status code is 200, and this means that all went well. So congratulations. Alright, let's go back to the guide for more instructions. So now it wants us to update the existing Node.js code with this code here. Now, an important part in saving and running code in Lambda functions is that you must deploy your code. So anytime you make a change, you have to deploy it first. And that's this button here. So let me update the code as instructed. And now that the code has been updated, I need to click on the deploy button. And I see that it's being updated. And now it says that it's been successfully updated. So I'll test it now to confirm the changes. And yes, I do see some logging information that was not there before. And back again to our guide to see what's next. I now need to update the code some more, deploy it, and test it again. And the changes this time is to replace the text hello from Lambda to the variable event. So I'll just make this code updated in my index page. And since I just made the change to my code, I first have to deploy it. Then I'll click on test to verify that it works. And yes, I get the 200 status code, and I see that the body of the return code also has changed. It used to say hello from Lambda, and now it has the JSON test event data. Alright, let's go back to the assignment guide and see what's next. Okay, so it seems you need to create a new test event called echo with query. And pass this JSON data. I also need to update the code in the to-do section with this code here. So I'll go back to my AWS Management Console. I'll click on the pull-down arrow next to the test button and choose Configure Test Event. I'll click Create New Event. And I'll type in the name of the test event. Then I'll update the event's JSON data. Then I'll click on Save. Now I will copy the code from the to-do section and update the Node.js code. And please remember to always deploy your code. And now that it's successfully deployed, I can run my test using the updated test event with the new JSON data. And the code returns the expected results. So that wraps up the week 4 assignment 1, and I'll jump right away into the week 4 assignment 2. And this assignment is about the AWS API Gateway. We need to build a new REST API, give it a name of Echo, and description of my Echo service, and then make it a regional API. So I'll go to the AWS Management Console. I'll search for API Gateway. Then I'll right-click to open to the new tab. And this is the landing page. You can see there are different types of APIs. And we need to build a new REST API. So I'll click on Create next to the REST API section. And from this page, we are creating a REST API. And I'll choose New API. For the API name, I'll type Echo. For the description, I'll type My Echo Services. And the endpoint type, I'll leave it as regional. Then I'll click on Create API. And it brings me to this page. And now let's go back to the assignment guide to see what's next. So we need to create a new method, and it will be a get method. So let's go back to AWS. And from the actions drop-down, I'll choose create method. From here, I'll click on the pull-down arrow. And you can see that we have many different types of methods. So I'll choose get. Then click on the check mark. And this opens up some more configuration options. The first is the integration type, and I'll leave that as the default Lambda function since that's what I want to do. I also want you to check the box for Use Lambda Proxy Integration. And for that Lambda region, please choose the current region we are using, which is the US East 1. And now let's give it the Lambda function name to integrate with this API, which is the Lambda function we created before, and it was called Echo function. Then let's save all of that. And I now get this pop-up window that confirms we are giving access to this API to invoke the Lambda function. And since that's what we want to do, I'll just click on OK. And this takes me to the Get Method Execution page. Okay, now that we connected the API to our Lambda function, let's go ahead and test it out. I'll click on the word test, which is just above the lightning bolt. And this takes me to the Get Method Test page. From here, I'll click on Test. On the right side, I can see my status code and the body of my response and other information. And you can see that my response is currently hello unknown. And that's because I didn't create or specify a value for the name parameter. So let's do that now. I'll click on Method Execution, then Method Request. Then I'll expand URL query string parameters. Then I'll add a new query string, and I'll call it name. Then hit the check button, and let's go ahead and test this out. I'll go back to my method execution page, then test, and now you see that my query string section has a field so I can type something in it. So I'll type name equals John. But of course you can use any name as you like, as long as you use the query string name, which is what we set up moments ago. And now I'll test it by clicking on the test button. And the test runs successfully because we get a 200 response code. And the difference now is that instead of hello unknown, we now see hello John. Alright, so it seems that our API works and it calls our Lambda function correctly. But this API is only local, so we must deploy it in order to make it available outside of AWS. So I'll click on the Actions pull-down button. Then I'll choose Deploy API, which is under the API Actions section. This will open a small dialog box, and here we need to choose or create a deployment stage. A stage is like an environment of where you want to deploy your API. So let's create a new stage. I'll call it API. For my stage description, I'll just type default API stage. And for my deployment description, I'll just type where I put my APIs. Then I'll hit deploy. And this takes me to the API stage editor page, and at the very top I can see the URL that I can now invoke to call my API. And so if I click on my URL, it opens up a web page and runs successfully because it shows hello unknown. But now let me add the name query string that we set up before, and I'll give it a value. Then I'll hit enter to test this feature, and yes, it works just fine. So that wraps up the second assignment for the week 4. I hope you are enjoying AWS and learning so much. In all honesty, this is a great skill to have, and it's highly in demand in the workplace. So please practice as much as you can. And of course, if you have any questions or issues, please do reach out to me at any time. Thanks for watching.